Welcome back to the Carb-Appropriate podcast. It is my absolute pleasure today to have with me my good buddy Joe Rogister, known as Joe Keto. As is usual, I have my little origin story about Joe. We met several years ago. We were introduced by a mutual acquaintance, or mutual buddy, I should say, Damiano Nicolacci. You won't like me calling him an acquaintance, through our other good friend, Brock Haddon. And it was really around the time that exogenous ketones were only just starting to enter Australasia. And I had obviously heard about exogenous ketones through my work and through my clinical work and research, but there wasn't really anything out there yet. And so, as Joe, I'm sure will agree, I was pretty cynical initially, or pretty skeptical, I should say, about the product and whether it would actually be as effective as was claimed. I was obviously very interested in trying it clinically, but I went in very much, trepidously. I wanted to try things out for myself and with some clients. And I was very surprised at the effect we got and the benefits we got, particularly with my brain injury patients back in those days. And so since then, obviously, Joe and I have done a lot of work together. We've, collaborated on a lot of ketone projects. And Joe's been nice enough to have me over to Aussie and other places to do some speaking on ketones and exogenous ketones. So welcome, Joe. It's absolutely great to have you on my podcast because you've had me on plenty of your webinars.
I know, man. I'm honored to that you asked, and it's very cool to be on the other end of the microphone.
Thanks, buddy. So you're obviously very well known now in this part of the world for practically introducing ketones to Australasia. I know that you weren't the only one, but you're certainly one of the prime movers there in introducing ketones and exogenous ketones to Australasia. But what was your background initially? I mean, did you study sports science or physiology or, health? How did you become involved in this business of health?
Well, you know what? I was in my late teens and 20s. I was the ultimate gym rat, and taking in every single possibly supplement that has ever been invented, every type of testosterone booster, whey protein shake, pre-workout. I used to stack caffeine and ephedrine and aspirin, just like crazy, uneducated stuff, reading in the magazines because there wasn't internet then. And by the time I'd hit about 35, and when I, kind of hit an office job, I turned into a not working out fat guy. And so much so, and I started looking for solutions. We were living in the United States at that point. I'm from Canada, but we had moved to the States. So I read some stuff. I think I saw the movie Food Inc. and then read the book Food Inc. and began to become very disenchanted with the entire food industry when you start to read about some of the things and the sports nutrition world, when you find out that probably a lot of the things they were telling me to do is why I felt so fat, sick, and tired at 35 years old.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do a squat. I had inflammation in all my knees. I couldn't run around the block. So as I started to learn about real food, and discovered CrossFit and functional movement and diet, basically a real food diet, and started to feel better. And then I felt like I needed to, at that point, we moved over to Australia and I had a chance to kind of reinvent myself because we had moved over on my wife's work. So dedicated my life to teaching other people how to avoid some of the marketing BS and how to kind of follow a diet that's really a long-term way of eating.
So how did you become involved with exogenous ketones? Because you must have been a really early adopter. I mean, you knew about the fact that these were out in the retail space before I did, and I'm a ketone researcher, right?
Yeah, I'd become a nutritional therapist, and I had initially started looking at bringing in our own product line into Australia because I didn't feel like there was anything really good in the marketplace over here at the time, 6 years ago, and then realized how difficult that can be to start up a nutrition company. You know this well, and then look to outsource it to just really good third-party providers. So in that, we did a lot of work with products coming out of the States and coming out of Europe, and trying to find the best so we could provide a really elite brand. And so somebody, a doctor friend of mine, said, you got to take a look at this, and literally asked me, what do you know about ketones and ketosis? And I said, yeah, it's that Atkins thing that nobody can do, right? Because I really like things that actually people can do. And showed me a cartoon video. And when I saw it, it was so unbelievable with my basic knowledge of chemistry, biology, and, and basic science that, you could get into ketosis within 60 minutes. That was the initial thing. And I thought, no way does that work. And this is the biggest load of crap that I've ever heard coming out of America. So I literally was inspired to buy it. So we brought some over. It took like 3 weeks to get it over from the States so that I could put it into my body, do all sorts of blood tests, and then be able to tell everybody why to never take it.
And so what did you notice originally? Like, what was your aha moment when you started taking the product?
Well, literally like 3 days in, and we got it. We had been doing a ton of research because after you see that cartoon video, then I got introduced to, now a mutual friend of ours and mentor of ours, Dom D'Agostino. And you find out that he created it. And he's, really like one of the pioneers of modern day keto research, and really one of the guys pushing it forward. And then you find out all the other things that this actual ketone molecule can do for you. So I was getting excited about it, and I was talking to people about it, and they were all excited about it. It was very much that doesn't work, but if it did, that'd be awesome conversation with everybody in the keto world that knew about it. And but then 3 days in to it and not changing anything else, my brain was lit up. And I'd been very healthy, right? Like I'd followed a very paleo alkaline-esque diet, but I still yawned. Right. And throughout the day, and I still got that carby dip and stuff like that, and not the best energy that I wanted. But I remember my wife saying to me, I was saying, hey, I'm going to disprove this. I'm going to disprove this. And she said, Joe, you've been talking on the phone to people about ketones for 18 hours. And it was like, I didn't realize the brain fog I had until it was gone. And then but the big thing was other people having that experience. And my wife had an incredible experience with it. She's got an autoimmune condition. Basically the symptoms of it are chronic fatigue and weight gain and anxiety and stress and stuff like that. And she just had a phenomenal result. And then once you start to see people you care about getting these kind of results, you start to get pretty passionate about it.
So there's obviously ketones, the product, exogenous ketones. And I guess I should disclose my conflict of interest now. Once I was introduced to the Prove It product by you, Joe. We obviously started using that in the clinic and still use it now for a bunch of reasons. I think it's the best product out there. So, everyone's aware of that, I'm sure. But I think it's important to make clear, because I know there's going to be a lot of naysayers listening to this who are saying, yeah, but you can't get into ketosis in 60 minutes. And I think it's important here to draw a distinction between nutritional ketosis proper, where the body is endogenously or internally producing ketones that are consistent with what we call ketosis, versus having the level of ketonemia or ketones in the blood that are the same, basically, consistent with nutritional ketosis. So that's what people are talking about when they say they can get into ketosis in 60 minutes. Now, a lot of the criticism would be then that, well, it's not the same. You're not getting the same adaptations. You're not getting the same fat adaptation. You're not getting the same effects. To which I would say, well, you are actually getting the effects of beta-hydroxybutyrate because you have to, right? You can't not get the effects of beta-hydroxybutyrate when it's in the blood. And so those things you mentioned, improved mood and cognition, focus and clarity, those types of things, and a whole bunch, I guess, of spin-off benefits from that, including, improved satiety, reduced cravings, reduced hunger, stuff like that, they are going to occur. And so there is going to be benefit there. And this is why I was so interested in looking at the product initially, because I could see immediately that there were patients of mine that could benefit, because it can be quite difficult sometimes to get into ketosis, to stay in ketosis, or in certain clinical situations, to have the levels of ketosis that are most conducive to improvement. So there we're thinking about things like neurodegenerative disorders, epilepsy, and like I mentioned, particularly my traumatic brain injury patients. So do you think that's a fair sort of summary of the subtle difference between nutritional ketosis versus the, I guess, therapeutic ketosis that we get from exogenous ketones?
Yeah, it's that's the initial knee-jerk reaction from anybody that knows about ketosis and knows about any type of science behind it is that exact distinction: ketosis and ketogenesis.
Yeah.
Right. And then once we can move past that, and that's, so, we can very quickly move people past that by just having a discussion like we just did. I think, we probably had the discussion back then. You knew a little bit more about it, but with most people, that's how it starts. Yeah. And then the conversation moves forward to, okay, is it the same? Well, you know what it is. I mean, the ketone molecule is bioidentical to the molecule that our body produces in this product. In some of the other products on the market, they have a mix of both isomers, but in this one, bioidentical. So yes, you are going to get those benefits. And then we can only revert back to, the anecdotal evidence that we're seeing, but then also that it's now being backed by science as more and more research comes out about this.
Yeah, we had an interesting finding. I'm not sure if I've explained this to you yet, because it's a fairly recent thing that came together when we were summarizing some of our research. We had a pretty interesting finding because we did an MCT study several years ago. It was probably 4 years ago now, actually. Which was published a couple of years ago. And we saw an association between ketone levels and improvements in mood and reductions in symptoms of what people call keto flu. And obviously, I've done 2/3 of the research, I guess, on keto flu that's out there in the literature at the moment. And that was an interesting finding. And we tried to back that up several years later with a study comparing 3 different low-carb diets, one being a true ketogenic diet and the other ones being non-keto low-carb diets, to see if we could see that same association between ketones and mood and symptoms of keto flu. And we didn't really see the same association. But interestingly, the people on the ketogenic diet were averaging around, I think, 0.9 millimoles of beta-hydroxybutyrate. So to put that into context for people who don't really know much about ketosis we consider to be greater than 0.5. They were about 0.9, which is pretty standard for a keto diet. However, in the first study, the MCT supplemented group were about 1.4 millimoles. The non-supplemented group, eating the same amount of calories and on a very strict ketogenic diet, were about 0.9. So we're basically seeing here that probably there's a tipping point at which people see the most benefit. And I've always said it doesn't matter too much. 0.5 to 1.5 doesn't really matter. But if people are wanting drastic improvements in cognition and mood and seeing, reduced symptoms of any of those symptoms of supposed keto flu that are out there, then maybe there is a bit of a tipping point over, say, 1 millimole or 1.1, 1.2. So perhaps there is a role there for boosting, even when people are in ketosis proper.
Yeah, I think that they're starting to talk more and more about that fast boost and how it's working with BDNF in the brain. And because that's one thing about exogenous ketones, like your body can't produce ketones that fast, to my knowledge. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a process. You're continually producing them. And that's another thing that people understand, and misunderstand, I should say. And we've talked about a lot, is people think ketosis is an on-off switch. But it's not. It's a spectrum. And it really depends on what your level of carbohydrate restriction is. Now, there's going to be flaws within that as well, because if you don't want to, and I wouldn't suggest that you do, if you don't want to drastically limit your veggies or, not have any berries and those other nutrient-dense foods, you can absolutely achieve ketosis. There's no doubt. And you can actually achieve relatively deep ketosis. But if you want to get a little bit more, you've only got 2 options, really. You either restrict a lot more or you fast a lot more, which may not be ideal for some people as well. Fasting's great, as we know, but past a point, it can still be detrimental. Or you can use things to boost ketones, like obviously MCTs, which encourage ketogenesis, or exogenous ketones, which give you an immediate boost in ketones.
Yeah, correct. And so, I mean, what do you think about that? Like to me, like, if I can have more ketones available, I know all of the things that ketones are proven to do, from an anti-inflammatory signaling thing, from everything that it's doing with the brain once it crosses the blood-brain barrier. Now that they've proved the brain runs better on ketones, if we have ways to get more of this molecule into our blood, I got to think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, I certainly think as a tool. And as you know, I'm a big believer in looking at exogenous ketones as a tool, and so whether or not someone is on a very strict keto diet or maybe a modified keto diet, maybe they're not even on a keto diet per se, they're on a lower carb diet, where they would benefit from a boost in ketones, it makes sense. It's self-descripting, really, that they will basically get a benefit from an increase in beta hydroxybutyrate from taking ketones. Now, the quickest way to do that is obviously to take exogenous ketone supplements. And I think what we're seeing now is a really big shift in perception from, this idea that if you're going to be a fat adapted athlete or you're going to be a fat adapted person and you're going to have some degree of keto adaptation, you've got to be on a really strict old school epilepsy style keto diet, and you can never do anything else outside of that. We're really starting to see now that people can be metabolically flexible. They can have a varied carbohydrate intake depending on who they are, what they're doing, what level of ketosis they want to have, if any. And they can also use mixed fueling. And, we're seeing that now in athletes like Dan Plews, other sort of biohackers like Paul Cadman and others who I've interviewed on this podcast. It's really interesting because we're starting to see that, what I call that carb-appropriate spectrum is also encompassing what I've gone on to call keto-appropriate, because they overlap and you can get benefit from all these types of fuels if your body is being efficient in its use.
Yeah, it really is an evolution, right? Because, do you like it? You've been around in the industry for a long time, a really long time. And do you, is this like when creatine came in, right? Before creatine, there was no way to get it into a supplement form. And then once you could have it as a supplement form, then there was a bit of an evolution, a bit of a knowledge gain, and then it very much became a mainstream thing. Is that what's going on here?
I think so. And the difference is that creatine, apart from a little bit of fear that some people had that they would, ridiculous stuff, that they would test positive for a drug test or that it would, destroy their kidneys or something, silly stuff that was pretty much put to bed very quickly. I think the difference is there is still a huge battle between high carb, low fat and low carb, high fat. And there is fear of ketosis in general. Now, as that wanes, I think we're going to see a pretty big shift because if anything, it's interesting because I still think that performance-wise, if someone wants an immediate boost to performance, and you may disagree, but there is nothing more powerful as a legal supplement than creatine. But that's about strength and power, and there's other benefits as well, cognitive benefits and things like that. But I almost see that the application of ketones is quite different, and it possibly even has a broader application. Now, it's not going to cure anything, and it's not going to cure anything straight off the bat, but as an adjunct, as a tool, it's very interesting. And I think the application for it, like the things I said, neurodegenerative disorders, obviously epilepsy. The fact that exogenous ketones aren't used more for epilepsy right now is crazy to me. Because the common retort is, well, to get your ketone levels that high, the diet needs to be so restrictive that people can't stick to it. So instead, we'll put them on drugs. And I'm thinking, hold on, we have supplemental methods now where someone can be on a pretty cool nutrient-dense modified keto diet and still get all those benefits.
Yeah, I think that we're around the corner from all that stuff. With, organizations like the Charlie Foundation in the States and more people coming out and getting behind exogenous ketones, right? We've just talked about it. The scientific advisory board is Dr. Jeff Volek now, and that's just going to bring so much weight to the conversation. And Dr. Colin Champ and Dr. Ken Ford, all these big people getting behind it that have a lot of clout in the U.S. so that people are opening up their minds to it. Remember, this has been such an evolution over the past 3 years. Like September 2015, the first exogenous ketone was released onto the market. And at that point, there was one study out that said taking exogenous ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate, bound with minerals and MCTs, can get you into a state of ketosis, right? And that was it. And then everybody still at that point, thought the brain needed, couldn't run on ketones, all that kind of stuff. And since then now, Dr. Stephen Cunnane has, got proof of concept that the brain runs better on ketones. We've seen all sorts of studies showing what exogenous ketones are doing. All the studies that are coming out usually with, a keto diet, adding in MCT and exogenous ketones, and adding in exogenous ketones. And these are all the test measures.
Yeah.
So it's just now and the anecdotal evidence that we're seeing, you can't deny. I mean, we're working with kids over here that have pediatric epilepsy, all sorts of great things, and seeing awesome anecdotal results.
So, Joe, does that mean that did you follow a keto diet, or do you have sort of a modified approach? How does that all work for you?
Yeah, I follow a very carb-appropriate diet. Now, carb-appropriate level for me is, I love that term. And I'm really pushing that forward because that's what I want from a nutritional therapy standpoint, and from a help tons of people standpoint. That's what I want people to get their head around, is exactly what you said, right? We don't have to follow this crazy archaic keto diet anymore to have a really efficient fuel, right? I don't think I think that the verdict's in on ketones, right? It's like apples to apples, carbs versus ketones. Ketones from an efficiency standpoint win for basic human function, survival, longevity, all type of stuff. There's a need for both of them.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm glad you said that.
No problem. No, absolutely, right. And so, but now that we can get the benefits of these ketones, now everybody can do it. And here's what I like, right? For my diet, when I was told to start this, I was told not to change anything. So I was following my paleo diet. I was working with a guy that was trained by Charles Poliquin, been in ketosis for 10 years before he ever saw exogenous ketones. He said, feel what it feels like to have carbs and ketones in your body at the same time before you make any change. Yeah. And so that's what I did. But you know what? After about a week, I was feeling so good that I, for the first time in my life, tried to intermittent fast. And then I felt great. And then, I got into ketosis very quickly. I didn't feel the keto flu. And I have been 2.5 years since, most days intermittent fasting. For the past year, I've been doing monthly extended fastings, and I'm mostly in ketosis. But I never worry if I want to go out and have a bunch of glasses of wine and a big ice cream sundae.
Yeah.
And I don't generally feel great just having sweet potatoes and quinoa or something like that. So I don't make a habit of doing it, because the carb appropriate level for me is to go very low carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Right. And then to not worry about it when I want to splurge on some sugary crap.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I think a lot of people can benefit from. I think about that because I, as you know, I do a very similar thing. I'm typically pretty low carb, like no carb pretty much, apart from veggies and berries and things through the week, typically. But we will, have the odd treat in the weekend, and it's not a lot, but it might be, one savory meal and maybe one sweet treat a week. And the way I look at it is area under the curve. It's that average amount of carbohydrate you're taking in over a long time. It is still very minimal. And it's, as you say, it's appropriate, and it's appropriate to your needs. Now, I think that people can benefit from that approach, which is basically freedom within structure. Because if you have a structure whereby your mindset is, these are the compendium of foods that I'm going to eat. They're natural, they're whole, they're unprocessed. And on the main, for a lot of people, I think low carb is going to be the way to go. So it's a compendium of low carb foods that are natural and unprocessed. But then if you only do that, you're going to fall off the wagon, because no one can be 100% compliant from now until the day they kick it, because it just doesn't work. But what's being found more and more in the research is, because adherence is the biggest problem with nutrition, where people have a structure that is very simple, and often abstinence is easier than moderation, but they have short periods in which they're allowed to have absolute freedom, that's basically the best sort of win-win situation.
Yeah, look, I think the failure of the diet industry, which I hate, is pigeonholing people into one thing They traditionally, is not something that they can do long term. So they fall off the wagon. They feel bad. Then this mindset thing comes into play. They think that they can't do it. They're a failure again. And then the whole cycle goes on over and over again. Even if they're a success, they're doing something where they're depleting their muscle mass, slowing down their metabolism. And then when they go back to doing what they were going to do before, because it's not a long-term solution, then they gain the weight back faster.
Exactly.
It's a cyclical thing, and just escalates in frustration and stress and all the horrible things that go along with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, given that there's a number of really, I think, exciting things happening in nutrition at the moment, from, interesting things like exogenous ketones through to a greater focus, I think, on the mind-body connection and behaviors and how we can exercise habit to get better results, but also going beyond that into really what improves our own individual human potential the most. I think there's a really interesting idea that I've been playing around with lately, and I really want to push some research back into the mind-body space, where I've done a lot of my former research in clinical practice, which is that all of the things we do, from eating well to supplementing to exercising and trying to sleep better, sleep hygiene, those types of things, they're all the key aspects of health. But they only provide the foundation. And there's actually something more than that, which is the next step. And that's where we really begin to exercise our own individual human potential. And that, to me, is more about passion and purpose and creativity and those types of things. So, there's a lot exciting happening. And what do you think is going to be, are going to be some of the most exciting things that are happening in nutrition and health in the next, say, 5 years?
Well, I think that what we're at is like the end of an evolutionary cycle about this way of eating concept, right? We've been through all the decades of bullshit, right? And in the eating 6 times a day and all that kind of stuff, and people are confused. They don't know what to do. They're getting all sorts of misinformation and disinformation from the diet industry, but everything is pointing in one direction. And that is, really those words, behind you, the carb-appropriate diet. And a way of really kind of cutting through the crap and giving people a real clear focus that it really doesn't have to be, if you feel good eating a very high fat diet, that's what you can do, very low carbs. If you need to be a little bit higher on the carbohydrate spectrum, then that's what you can do. We've certainly seen the fact that, even the food industry, which I normally dislike, the fact that we've had some sugar replacements that don't spike blood sugars and that are actually have some healthy side effects for you, has made it so that people can have their sweet treats now.
Yeah.
And what all that means, I mean, like a lot of your audience, I'm sure, is at some point in a journey on their knowledge about ketones, from the very big experts to the people that have been following you for a while and have getting great advice and knowing more about what this actually is, far beyond the keto diet.
Yeah.
Right. And so to the top, experts, those ones that are ready to take their human performance to a next level, this is that biohacking thing. For people that are on the middle point in the journey, when they're learning how to make a keto lifestyle or a carb appropriate lifestyle work for them, this is going to be this awesome tool. And then it's the people that are at the far end of that spectrum that are just getting started, that they're the ones that are out there waiting around in the muck, trying to figure it out. Maybe they've even heard of keto and they are on to their Dirty Keto Facebook group, where they're learning about eating cheese and bacon and all the wonderful recipes you can make with that. And they think that it's a cheese, bacon, fat bomb diet, right? They're going to falter and drop off and perhaps be turned off of a carb appropriate lifestyle.
Yeah.
With all of the knowledge, like, we've been over to, and I can't wait till you go over to one as well, but to these keto academies in the United States, where it's literally, from, Jeff Volek to NASA astronauts to, the people talking about PTSD, every area of metabolic, neurological health, Mary Newport and her research on Alzheimer's and all this stuff, all getting on stage to talk about why they're so excited about ketones. I still remember Dr. Stephen Cunnane showing his brain scans of people, on a carbohydrate-based diet, a ketone fueled diet, and it was incredible. And this is we're bearing witness to these advances in our knowledge. So as that permeates more into humans' brains, that's going to, allow your knowledge to seep more into people's brains as well. Because what I like about how you portray this is you take it out of the super science speak, and even though you know that side of it, bring it into terms that people can understand.
I think there needs to be a bit more pragmatism, and you make a couple of really important points. And one of those is that, and I've spoken about this a lot with, my colleagues, people like Eric Helms and whatnot, who are typically they would probably admit more carb biased, but a lot of what we hear in nutrition, even nutrition for health, is actually coming from experts in orthodox sport nutrition. They're people who are focused on performance. And there, I would still say that the results in terms of, keto versus high carb, all the various spectrum between that is somewhat equivocal, right? Because some athletes thrive on high carb and some on low carb. And I think we're only now starting to really broach metabolic flexibility and, mixed fueling, because people think if you're a keto athlete, you have to basically be keto all the time and you can't have any carbs during training or events. And that's obviously rubbish, because all the keto athletes out there basically live low so they can be more fat adapted, but still use mixed fueling strategies. But a lot of what's seeping through into the public health guidelines and into the mainstream is these science jerks out there who are focused on performance, saying, hey, there's not a lot of benefit here, but they're forgetting that there are evidence-based applications for low carb and keto. And there's no doubt about that, for things like neurodegenerative disorders, for diabetes, it's the prime example. People say, well, any good natural unprocessed diet has a really good preventative effect on development of type 2 diabetes. And they're right, they're correct. However, once someone has metabolic syndrome, once someone's on the path to diabetes, keto and low carb kicks the crap out of any other diet for treating it. They're two different things. And so we need to look at the differences between nutrition for performance, which can be quite varied, and the application of nutrition for particular disorders, which is often actually a little bit more specific in terms of what is going to give the best treatment outcome for most people most of the time. And so the other aspect of what you were saying before is sort of alluding to this idea of outcomes-based nutrition. It's ridiculous to say, well, the best diet or the best supplement is X or Y, because there is no best. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. And so, for example, if someone is looking to lose body fat, then it's probably fair to say that the evidence points toward low carb being more effective for loss of body fat than high carb, low fat. That's clear. However, if you're looking to put on a maximum amount of muscle, there's certainly a lot of evidence which shows that you should, at that point, add some carbs back into your diet. And this speaks again to the idea of being carb appropriate. What are you trying to achieve? And it doesn't mean that you have to be high carb, low fat. It just means, hey, you're probably going to benefit from it. Some increased calories, some increased carbs, and the rest. So outcomes-based nutrition is really important because it adds pragmatism to the field instead of people just arguing over what amounts to stupid shit, really.
Yeah, and imagine if you start adding in those carbs back and you do want to put on that muscle mass, but then you're also now able to add in ketones from a supplement form and help with the protein synthesis and help with the repair and recovery from your workout so you can bounce back faster, train harder, break down muscle better, and then have it recover faster as well.
Well, and people will hear that and they'll say, that's crazy, because if you've got glucose and ketones in your blood together, you're suddenly going to blow up or something, right? People have this idea that something's going to combust. But we can see already in the research emerging that the application of both ketones and carbs together has some pretty interesting ramifications, from the things you mentioned through to increased insulin sensitivity and glycogen repletion rates and things like that. So that's kind of cool. But we need to take a step back and look at the physiology too. If you're on a non-keto, low-carb diet, your ketones are going to be higher than if you're on a high-carb, low-fat diet. And if you're on a true keto, very low carb diet, they're going to be even higher still. So that shows that there's a spectrum, and you have glucose in your blood. It's not like you go into ketosis and suddenly you've got no blood glucose. If that happened, you'd die, right? Because you need to sustain a certain amount of blood glucose at around, let's say, 4 to 5 odd millimoles to preserve proper blood volume and to supply the fuel that red blood cells use, because they can't use ketones or fatty acids. And so there's a certain amount of glucose that the body will create and it will require. But that in itself is a proof that you can use both, because you have to. You know, we never use one sole fuel source for everything that we're doing at one particular moment. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, and this is the evolutionary cycle of our knowledge, right? People, it took a while for them to get the idea that an exogenous ketone could even exist, and now, as everybody gets their heads around this, then there'll be more and more support. And like I think you're seeing it in the popularity of the keto diet, right? And that's going to be there for a long time, because that has now been put into terms that the masses can understand. But as exogenous ketones have been on the market longer, and as people realize what they are, it's going to be more mainstream. From all of the branched chain amino acid companies and supplement companies now that are bringing out keto products, right? They were all the ones, in September 2015 that were saying that's all crap, right? Most of them still didn't know that it wasn't raspberry ketones at that point. But now they're all coming out with their own keto product, and these are big name people, right? These are, kind of very respected people in the industry. So it's all just a point in evolutionary change, and I love that, because what that means to me, it's, we can the super elite athletes, like you, Cliff, and I think a lot of the people that are already discovered ketones and are using it for fueling their bodies, they're like the top 5%.
Yeah.
Right. All the people that you're talking about that they need ketones for a therapy, that's everybody, right? That's our epidemics. That's our obesity rates. Those are our people that are going pre-diabetic or diabetic already. And these are the people now that have this, they're drinking, Pepsis all day long or whatever, and Monsters and Red Bull and all this stuff. And now they've never tried anything that's ever worked for them. It's all too hard because they don't get it. And now they can, shake something up in water and drink it once a day, and they see that as easy.
Yeah.
And I normally hate easy. I hate magic bullets. I hate quick fixes. But this easy does all the things that you've been talking about this whole podcast. And, the increasing insulin sensitivity and leveling out blood sugar, I got to think, with all of our blood sugar related problems in our world today, is got to be the biggest win in the health and wellness industry that we've ever seen.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly a tool, and obviously I'm always quite circumspect about how I frame the use of any supplement, really, because obviously I'm a food first kind of guy. But I do agree with you that there's a lot of application, and that the whole idea of keto has shifted. I was speaking to a business colleague just yesterday, and there's still a perception in some quarters that keto is for the elite, it's for the extreme. So it's mainly going to be aesthetic type athletes, your bodybuilders or extreme people doing extreme endurance events and things. And I just don't see that anymore. I mean, it's so much of a mainstream thing. Keto is growing faster than I think any other type of diet in terms of awareness. It's not as big yet as plant-based nutrition, because plant-based nutrition is huge, but it's certainly growing faster, and it's now bigger, as far as I know, than it's bigger than paleo. And so it's definitely a mainstream thing. And I think that awareness is only going to help, because as we become more pragmatic in our view of what keto and low carb and all those various terms are, we can really get down to some individualization where people work out what is working best for them and what's going to work best for their future health.
Yeah, and this just starts the conversation, right? Like the amount of people that have watched the little cartoon video that Prove It put out, that went, oh my God, maybe I can do that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, whether they were doing it because they wanted easy, quick fix results, they started watching videos about Dom D'Agostino and Dr. Mary Newport. And, at some point, somebody said to him, they asked some question about something, and somebody pointed them towards a Cliff Harvey video, right? And so, it's this bring them to church, baptize them later type of idea that we can start the conversation, bring them in, with the easy, and then they stay for the fact that they feel fantastic when they just make some tiny shifts, right? We can cut out sugar after 9 p.m. in probably the bulk of our population's diets, then we can just do incredible stuff. If you start stretching that out throughout the day, that's a long-term healthcare.
Absolutely. Those small changes done consistently are incredibly powerful, and people don't necessarily realize that. And I think that, that approach you talked about, I sort of framed that up. This is actually from one of my former colleagues, someone I respect a lot, Carmen Bott, I think one of the best strength coaches in the world. She's fantastic. She used to say when I worked with her that we're not here to convince anyone. We just do our job. We do a really fucking good job as strength coaches, putting out great content, good advice. And we're not here to try and sell anyone, because you do the work and people get it, right? And that's why I think the approach which is something I did actually appreciate with some of the people in the early days of when I was first introduced to exogenous ketones, is they weren't trying to sell me on a business or on a product. They basically said, hey, you know about this stuff. Here's the product. Give it a crack. Use it with your clients. Let us know what you think. It was that simple. And I think that speaks for itself, because if you can use something in that way and see benefits, then there's no need for selling.
Yeah, and I think that rolls right down from the top. Like literally the guys that bought the original patent off of Access Global, which came from the research from University of South Florida. They went to University of South Florida to meet Dom D'Agostino, going to find a fat loss product.
Yeah.
Right, a weight loss product, really, not even a fat loss product, something that burned fat for fuel. That's what they were sold. That's what got them to the meeting. And they went in there, and Dom D'Agostino, they still tell the story, said, hey, listen, it'll help do that, but take a look at this, right? And started talking about signaling molecules and introduced them to the research that Angela Poff was doing and all these other people that he was working with around the country. And they saw it as something more, and they aligned with all those people to just lead with education on this, because, again, back then, nobody knew what this was or what it could be. And because they did that, it is very much an education first type of thing. They acknowledge, because they've sold billions of dollars of nutraceuticals around the world, that nobody wants to be sold to, right? The fancy marketing thing is what has got us to where we are today, right? If we can just present people with the information, have them do the research, put it in simple terms if people want to not be so sciencey about it, but provide the really scientifically strong studies for those people that do want to, then people decide for themselves.
Yeah.
It's a respectful relationship, I think, between a consumer and a promoter of something.
So you've obviously lived that for the last couple of years, and you've been, incredibly successful in your business. So what do you see, based on your experience, as being some of the biggest mistakes that people make in this type of business? Because, we're straight up about the fact that this is it's a social marketing business. It's a network marketing style of getting the product out there. Something that I was, like a lot of people, a little bit reluctant to step into. And then given that there was a product first approach rather than a sales first approach, I was fairly comfortable with that, because I think if a product's good, a product's good. But given your experience over the last couple of years and, throughout your history in business, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that people are making in this industry?
Well, from an industry in the whole, there's been a lot of mistakes made. I mean, the network marketing, multi-level marketing model is really, it's a distribution model.
Yeah.
Just like traditional retail, just like wholesale, just like affiliate models, it's a method of getting products from manufacturer to end consumer. It's just this one utilizes word of mouth marketing, which is the most efficient marketing method on the planet. And it also ties in really well. Like this all started 60 years ago with Amway, right? That was before the World Wide Web, right? Now it's become an even more efficient business model. Amway, by the way, did $8 billion in their 63rd year last year in sales. So they're still out there doing okay with this business model.
Oh, they're huge.
But yeah, and then there's been a whole ton of companies that have followed that. It's very much been a business model, a marketing model, without a strong product to back it.
Yeah.
So those products, if you're going out and convincing people based on a marketing plan that this is an incredible product, but it's not that good, then that's where the industry has gotten into trouble. Right. And you see that from the trouble that they've gotten into and the reputation that they have. But if you can plug in a product that actually helps, and there's a few companies that are out there doing this well, a very quality product that is not overpriced, that you can't get somebody else somewhere else for less, then you have a very effective way of getting that word out. With exogenous ketones, and I think this company, it's taken to a new level. Because this type of education really does lead to like a true long-term health plan that's not about taking pills and potions all day long. Exogenous ketones, like we always say, is a tool. It's a lever. It's a very effective lever in helping people make long-term health change, and also opening their minds to learning about what I learned about, a decade ago, real food.
Yeah.
And it's the most effective tool that I've ever seen come on the market. So, but still out there's going to be people that probably, push too hard with the product, anything like that. I mean, I think that I know what we're working together on is to gather that group of professionals, of people in the health and wellness world that really give a shit about making a real long-term change, about having a big impact and expanding out the amount of people that we can reach, gathering all those people together so they can be the voice, and then teaching, all the people that don't have the training, like the moms and the, just even the weekend warriors of the athletes out there that would also like to take advantage and share this with people, teaching them to just being megaphones behind you. Yeah. And Dom D'Agostino and Dr. Mary Newport, and just get their research out there and the real stuff. And again, let people decide for themselves.
Well, that's the key. And I think, I've never been a good company man, so to speak. I wouldn't have been one of the good employees at Big Blue back in the 50s. From being kicked out of high school through to being kicked out of nutrition class at university. I've certainly had many times where I've been very contrarian. I think that's been a strength because I'm always looking around for, for things that are interesting, that are maybe outside the norm, but also not just prepared to take things at face value or for what someone says. So I've been very open with you that as other products have entered the market, I've tried them. And the interesting thing is just when I expect for something else to come along, it hasn't lived up to the claims. And I've obviously just used, the Prove It product exclusively in my clinical practice. And again, anyone listening in thinking I'm just some paid shill or something, I'm not. I wish I was. I wish I was making millions of dollars out of the stuff. I don't. I just basically use the product that I use because I dig it. I get the best results out of it. It doesn't make me run to the bathroom, and I see the best results with my patients, right? So it's that simple. Now, if people are going to judge that and say, oh, well, you're basically just hawking product, that's not the case at all, because I could easily go without any product if there was no need for it. And that's not where my bread and butter is. My bread and butter is from doing stuff like this, creating content, writing books, giving advice, giving lectures. So it's really not, a massive part necessarily of my remuneration. It's more so that it's just the product that I dig. And that's really surprised me, because I would have expected there to be some major disruption, but the companies that are doing a good job seem to be one step ahead of the rest at the moment. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely, like everything else on the market, is a version of the original formula that the original keto OS formula, the ketone operating system. And so all those products, and this comes from, basically economies of scale.
Yeah.
Beta hydroxybutyrate as an ingredient wasn't even around back then. One company brought it out, put the money into it, and then became, the largest distributor of it in the world. As they grew and had more money to dump into research and development, they could further the science on it. And now, just like many things, like an Uber and Lyft, right? Or they own the marketplace, and so they have continued to kind of advance the formulas. And as we talked about, they were the first one to then come out with the bioidentical ketone to get rid of the L isomer and go with just the D or the R. And then they found a way to create it through a fermentation process. So they could stop the use of the chemicals and only create it that way. And so they brought that out.
And so that's a really good thing to bring up, because again, as you know, I start to feel reluctant when I'm talking about product, because I don't want to be seen as being a product guy. I want to be product agnostic. But that's one of the biggest things for me, is that it uses 100% of that D-form beta hydroxybutyrate. Now, some people have suggested that that's not that important. My position on that is I don't want to take the risk, because, we've seen with things like, the best example of that is synthetic folic acid, pteromonoglutamate, versus the methylated folate, which is a naturally occurring form in the body. There's enough emerging evidence that we wouldn't want to take the risk of taking in the long term synthetic folic acid, right? Because of all those signaling properties and things. Now, given that beta hydroxybutyrate is not just a fuel, it also has molecular signaling properties through the body for a range of things, I don't think it's worth taking the risk. And now, with the newer versions that are coming out of exogenous ketones, to me, they're just getting, now you tell me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like they're getting stronger and stronger, and you're getting really big boosts of ketones compared to, say, the first versions that were out there. And so you're getting, for basically the same price as a couple of years ago, a remarkably superior product, and that just continues to progress.
Yeah, no, exactly. And they've continued to up their game. I think we were talking about the other day, like they switched to a methylated B12. They continually, they went out and bought Optogenics, the creators of AC11 or CMed 100, when they had proven that it repairs DNA. And now that's just an ingredient in all of their ketone products. So they've gone and not only found a better way to actually process the ketone, but also to have ingredients in there that synergistically work alongside of it. And also, like, apparently, because we are seeing such good results, apparently are making those results more powerful. So this halo effect around all these different ingredients that are working together to make it better than what other people are coming out with.
Yeah, and that's sort of, some of that stuff is what I alluded to earlier, in that we can take certain things. You can take a truckload of caffeine before a workout and get a great workout. Now, it's just caffeine. It's just stimulating you. There's not much other benefit unless you have it in coffee form, and there's all the, cool polyphenols and things that are doing all the antioxidant stuff that leads to improved health outcomes. But apart from that, if you're just taking a big whack of caffeine, you're just getting a big whack of caffeine. Whereas with some of these interesting things coming out, like, your exogenous ketones, your cat's claw extracts, like your CMed 100, some of the other interesting things they're beginning to put in products, but also other things outside of the ketone space, like the real reinvestigation now of medicinal mushrooms and various herbs and things. You're seeing really interesting stuff that when I studied 22 odd years ago, you would have thought was impossible. When we studied, we were still told that neurons do not repair. They don't regrow. Basically, if you destroy a neuron, it's gone. Whereas now we know that we've got things like exogenous ketones, which can help the body to regrow neurons. You've got things like, cat's claw extracts like CMed 100, which help to protect DNA. You've got things like, and also encourage neural repair as well. You've got things like lion's mane mushroom, which, as you know, I'm a big fan of, which is proven to increase neurodegenerative factor. So it's helping to regrow nerve tissue as well. So this is the kind of stuff where we've got such massive long-term potential for the things that scare us the most, like neurodegenerative disorders. You know, when I poll my clients, probably the biggest fear they have now, 20 years ago, it was of being overweight. They didn't want to look big, right? Now people are worried about how much energy am I going to have, and is my brain going to last? It's crazy, but it's a really cool health focus that I think we're starting to see.
Well, and thank God somebody shared this with me, because when you see the results that I had with brain function, right, even from a healthy but very carb-full diet, even though it would probably be considered a lower carb diet and a healthier carb diet than most people had, I still was in a daydream, basically, compared to what I am now, discovering ketones. And so, and then you introduced to me lion's mane, and it's, changed my coffee consumption ever since. And so all these things, are starting to pile up. And that's a very interesting conversation with Dr. Ken Ford, who is the ex-chairman of NASA, talking about the next 15 years, we are going to see such advances in this. Now that they have identified, that just about everything in the body is just signals on and off.
Yeah. No, I think you've probably you've mentioned a few people thus far. People like Angela Poff, Dom D'Agostino, Steve Finney, Jeff Volek, a bunch of those amazing people in the health space who have been really some of the foundational researchers in low carb and keto. But you've obviously, what you do transcends just being in a supplement business. You have a successful, thriving content marketing business, basically. So in line with that, who are... And I think I just lost Joe periodically. So we'll see if we can get him back. I was about to ask him a very exciting question.
Crazy, it just kicked me off for a second. Maybe the hour.
And you're back, Joe.
Yeah, it just kicked me off. I thought maybe it was I was only allowed an hour. I talked too long.
No, you're allowed as much time as you want. I was in the middle of pumping you up and saying you've got a very successful content marketing business. And what are some of your sort of go-to resources, whether it's books or people that you follow who are outside of the health space? Like, who do you get inspiration from for business and for life and for balance in general?
Oh, look, I love not only Tony Robbins stuff, but just from getting more out of your life type of space, but also his business partner that a lot of people don't know, Joseph McLennan III. He's written a number of different books. The recent one, like Get Happy, just about. I like to bring it back to simple things. So, I probably talked to you about this before, but two of my favorite personal development books are The Energy Bus from John Gordon and Scott Alexander, who wrote Rhino Success. And I cannot recommend these books enough, because I like again dealing with things that help the masses and help them take small steps towards it. Everything else from Think and Grow Rich to all these other different books, but I think you go on a progression of them. Certainly though, the amazing things that I've seen that are happening is, and this was, probably Ish as well, but I was introduced to this by Tim Ferriss interviewing Dom D'Agostino. And then one of the best things I've ever seen is Joe Rogan interviewing Dom D'Agostino. And when you start to hear, I don't know if you've seen that podcast, but it's a 3-hour marathon, but it is just mind blowing about the research that's going on behind this.
Yeah.
So I guess where I'm finding inspiration now is this meshing between like mainstream media and like we've made science cool.
Yeah.
Right. From Dave Asprey to to now moving into this thing where you got this like Dom D'Agostino, even though he can deadlift 500 pounds after a 7-day fast, like he's a super nerd. Right? If you ever heard this guy talk, he's a massive scientific nerd, but we've made him into a rock star.
And that's a movement that's occurring. You've got people who are legitimate researchers, nutritional scientists or exercise physiology scientists who are weapons, like Eric Helms is a great example. I know, he's one of my best mates. He's a great guy. He can deadlift, Olympic lift with the best of them, and he's a legit protein researcher. You've got guys like Brett Contreras, like Dom D'Agostino, all those guys, and it's really cool to see that there is a bit of a renaissance, I think, in terms of physical culture. So it's not just about having the brain and the nerdy stuff and getting your pencil out. You also have to be living that as well. And I think that's a great movement, because even with all the data in the world, I think there's got to be some talk behind the walk.
Yeah, and look, we need that strength, right? We need that strength right now, because it is. I mean, we've still got, you can talk about ketosis or exogenous ketones to people all day long, and they will still walk into their GP, and the GP a lot of times is going to say, "Oh, that's ketoacidosis. That's bad." Right.
Yeah.
And nothing against them. It's just, that's the knowledge base that's out there right now. So that, and the fact that we're still seeing articles out there about coconut oil being poison and all this kind of stuff that's out there. And look, we got to make it cool, right? In the same way, like, sugar has way cooler advertising than the old way that we taught people about health.
Yeah.
Right. Coca-Cola, Gatorade, like, that's way cooler than, the actual healthy stuff. So now that we're making it cool again, I think we got a shot. Yeah,
and I think there are problems inherent within anything, but I think with the reappreciation, I hope, of science and scientists, I think we're going to see, hopefully a better transmission of that research and that really good information out to the masses as well. Because we're starting, I've had a lot of discussions with people in academia about this. There's no point writing a scientific paper which is read by 6 people. And I read an article where they reckon that was something like the average is about 6 people read an article.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And our latest paper, I think it's been out for about 2 weeks, has been read now by 7,000 people.
Yeah.
And it will continue to grow because there is this awareness there, but it's also about the media that we use to get the information out there. And you need the younger, savvier people who are actually talking the walk as well to get that out there.
Yeah, and as long as we have people like you, and as long as we continue to grow that group, right, that are taking, because even to me, I love a good scientific study, but if you take that scientific study and explain to people in very simple terms why that's going to give them better, energy, focus, fat loss, mood, and sleep, these underlying things that mean real health, then that's going to get more people viewing them. And that's what I know that you're great at doing and what I love, right? And, anytime you put out a study, we'll immediately put it in front of 50,000 people in a Facebook group.
Yeah.
And say, holy shit, look at this, right? Further evidence about why you're feeling so good.
And I'll leave you with one more thing as well. There's a problem with scientific literature in that it can only say so much. And that's important because we obviously need to make sure that what we're putting out is it needs to be somewhat equivocal because there's no answer from any one paper. However, the researchers behind that paper might be connecting the dots between different research that they've done or different research that is out there, or even things that they're seeing in the data that they can't really come out and say, well, this is exactly what's happening. But they can have a pretty strong hunch that certain things are occurring. And in talking with those scientists, or by reading maybe their lay summaries or looking at their video explainers or having them on podcasts and things, you start to get a broader picture of what's actually going on. Because for most people as well, a scientific paper is somewhat indecipherable.
Yeah. Completely. And look, and I would love to, and that's kind of when you talk about the content that I put out, I'd love for anybody to come on and if they've got something they feel passionate about that's evidence-backed, to kind of interview them and get that word out to as many people as we possibly can. And as I know, the more practitioners that we talk to that are utilizing these, products like exogenous ketones to drive patient outcomes, we're taking, it's almost like levels, like the top researchers in the world now working with those integrated health practitioners. So that we can then they can be the strength behind all these people all over Australia, into Asia, everywhere that exogenous ketones are hitting. And It is. It's creating an army of people out there that are singing the praises of carb-appropriate life.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to tie it up, Joe. You've done a better job than me of wrapping up that cast.
Stop.
Mate, I could talk to you for hours, and I know that we will have many more conversations in the coming months and years. But thank you so much for being on the Carb-Appropriate podcast today.
Absolute pleasure, buddy. And seriously, thank you for all you're doing to get all this info and for jumping on my podcast every time that I ask.
My pleasure, mate. So I'll have to get you back on because I really want to keep drilling down, particularly into some of the business concepts that you've developed as well, because I think a lot of our health practitioner audience will get a lot out of that too. So we'll have to do this again soon. And I know that I will be chatting with you very soon on your webinars as well. So if everyone can just make sure they stay in the loop, follow me on Facebook. Make sure you connect with the various pages that Joe is part of on Facebook as well. And we'll have all the details for that stuff on our show notes. So thanks, Joe. We'll close it off now, and I will talk again with you soon.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy.
See ya.